Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with another Bible study. If you've not been here before, definitely start at the top. But today we're doing something extra. We're going to give a whole new warning. I'm going to be stepping on a lot of toes today, especially. And because of that, I'm going to warn you now. If you are sensitive, if you are one of those people who get butthurt very easily, this is not going to be the place for you. This is a Bible study where we read what the Bible says and we take what it says and we talk about what it says. We're not putting doctrine onto the words, we're just talking about the words. We explore several possibilities of what some of the things may mean. And today we're going to be talking, starting in Genesis 39, about the last righteous man in Genesis. We're going to be talking about the last guy who did anything right for a while. And so, definitely start at the top. I hold unconventional views. I am okay with you calling me heretic. I'm here to logically debate and discuss and to show you in the Bible why my beliefs are what they are. I came to my beliefs, as controversial as you may find them, through reading the Bible. And so, I'm just taking you through down the path, line by line, word by word. If that upsets you, you have to take that up upstairs. That's not on me. I do not believe that the Bible is the inerrant, unfailing Word of God. I believe that there have been mistranslations, there have been additions and subtractions to the knowledge that we are allowed to have throughout the years by many, many different peoples. That's almost like confirmed fact. Like it's almost beyond the point of debate at this point. I believe that there are inconsistencies within the Bible itself that are irreconcilable unless you just give it that magic hand wave that it's prophecy or that it's predestined and the divine right and will of God that these things contradict. Like we have discussed many of them in this Genesis Bible study, and today we're going to definitely dive into one. I'm going to try to get through the rest of Genesis. I don't know if my voice will hold out, but I'm hoping it does. And I'm going to try to go through this rather quickly. This is a lot of content. I'm going to talk about it when I need to. If it takes two shows, it just takes two goes, right? If we have to do it today and tomorrow. Let's dive in. We're going to talk about Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Quick recap, what happened prior to this. Joseph got sold into slavery by his brothers because he honored his father, right? Because he did what was required of him to carry a report that his brothers were not doing what they were supposed to be doing. Now, we don't know what they were doing that they were not supposed to be doing, but regardless, it was something they were not supposed to be doing, and Joseph held to the rules. And he went to his father, and he told his father about him, and then his brothers got mad that he made the report. His dad sends him back out there. They decide to sell him into slavery. So, the one guy that we have seen in most of Genesis, like from Noah on, everybody we've seen so far have not kept to the law. They have not in any way, shape, or form been the shining example of what you would think the chosen people would be. Joseph, however, is. Joseph, however, you would think, okay, this guy, because Joseph holds to the law. He is blessed. He does what is righteous throughout this part. And let's get into it. So, meanwhile, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, where an Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. We've talked about these locations before. I'm not going to go over to Google Earth. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him and made him prosper in all that he did, Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household and entrusted him with everything he owned. From the time that he put Joseph in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's household on account of him. The Lord's blessing was on everything he owned, both in his house and in his field. So Potiphar left all that he owned in Joseph's care. He did not concern with himself with anything except the food that he ate. That's a lot. Like, that is a lot of trust being placed in this guy, right? This is a slave that you bought, and you see that he is doing the correct thing so much that you put him in charge of things. And he does well in those things that you put him in charge of. So over time, he increases in his responsibilities until he has been running everything. And this guy has nothing to do, right? Because Joseph is doing his job as he is supposed to. He is faithfully executing his duties as he is supposed to, despite the fact that he is a slave. He is owned by this man, and he is bringing prosperity onto this man. Okay, now, Joseph was well built and handsome, and after some time his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." It's always that temptation, right? But he refused. "Look," he said to his master's wife, "with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in his house, and he has entrusted everything he owns to my care. No one in this house is greater than I am. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. So how could I do such a great evil and sin against God? Not against my master who has entrusted me with this, but how could I sin against God?" Again, faithfulness. This man is faithful. This man is doing what is right as far as we can tell. Like, they haven't been given the law yet, but as far as we can tell, he is holding to the commandments that God's going to give him later. How could I sin against God? And although Potiphar's wife spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be near her. She is constantly on him, like, "Hey, what's up? Could you withstand that temptation?" Joseph did. Again, faithful. And one day, however, Joseph went into the house to attend to his work, and not a single household servant was inside. And she grabbed Joseph by his cloak and said, "Sleep with me." But leaving his cloak in her hand, he escaped and ran outside. Your boy just bucked out his clothes and took off so he wouldn't be caught in the trap. And then what happens? When she saw that he left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants and said, "Look, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us." And by sport, you know what it means, right? Said, "He came to me so he could sleep with me. But I screamed as loud as I could. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." So Potiphar's wife kept Joseph's cloak until his master came home. And then she told him the same story. "The Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But when I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." Now, she is bearing false witness against him, and he has been nothing but faithful for years, right? It had to have been years, even though we're not really told how long. It had to have been a significant amount of time to become the slave put in charge of everything. But when his master heard the story his wife told him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," he burned with anger. And so Joseph's master took him and had him thrown into prison, where the king's prisoners were confined. And while Joseph was there in prison, and the Lord was with him, and extended kindness to him, granting him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And the warden put all the prisoners under Joseph's care, so that he was responsible for all that was done in the prison. And the warden did not concern himself with anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So, we have an object lesson right here that we need to touch on. So, we're going to pause. This right here is 100% unjust, right? This is life's circumstances that can turn you bitter. This is an example of Job in Genesis. This is an example of a man being faithful despite the circumstances thrown upon him. Despite all of the things that happened to him, he remains faithful. And he is falsely accused and thrown into prison, and remains so faithful that in prison he becomes the example. In prison, he's the guy that they put in charge of everybody else. He becomes the trustee. Now, number one, what's that tell us? He was there for a while. Doesn't tell us how long, but it doesn't happen overnight that you become the trustee of the entire prison and trusted with everything in it. And not where the warden didn't have to concern himself because the prisoner was taking care of things. That takes a little bit of time, especially considering the times, right? We're looking not now when it's relatively civil. in these days it was not. It was not. The history of humanity is uncivility. Look at Genesis. So, next up, Genesis 40. The cupbearer and the baker. Sometime later, the king's cupbearer and baker offended their master, the king of Egypt, and Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Didn't really need to name it twice, but okay. And imprisoned them in the house of the captain of the guard, the same prison where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he became their personal attendant. So, he's been there and taken care of this prison so well and so long that he's given two prisoners to take care of him, a cupbearer and a baker. Okay, now that is the Lord being faithful in your trials, because he's not just a slave, but a prisoner while a slave for something that he didn't do, that he refused to do. After being repeatedly harassed to do it, he's still being persecuted. But the Lord's being faithful. The Lord's seeing that he's provided for in the prison. Even though he's being persecuted, he's still being provided for. Okay, so, and after they had been in custody for some time, both of these men, the Egyptian king's cupbearer and baker, who were being held in the prison, had a dream on the same night. Each dream had its own meaning. And when Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were distraught. So he asked the officials of Pharaoh who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why are your faces so downcast today?" "We both had dreams," they replied, "but there was no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So he's confident enough in his faithfulness that he's like, "All right, tell me what you got." Now, I can tell you that most people, even if they come to you for advice, are not going to listen to you. Even if someone comes to me, right, and says, "What do you think this dream means?" And I know their situations, and I know their subconscious and the things that they are worried about, I can even have some kind of divine inspiration. Not saying that, but even then, I could tell them and they still wouldn't listen to me. So that's the nature of man, to just ignore that. But these men were both so bothered that they were willing to tell their dreams, for one, because most people don't do that. Like, especially men, especially at the time, there's no way that it, now maybe it was part of their thing, like having dreams important, and it's okay, yeah, okay. I can see that. So they tell the dream, right? And Joseph said, "The dreams belong to God. Tell them to me." He's so confident in his faithfulness that he thinks that God's going to let him interpret it. That's perfectly plausible to me. And so the chief cupbearer told Joseph in his dream, "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As it budded, the blossoms opened, and the clusters ripened into grape. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into his cup, and placed the cup into his hand." And Joseph replied, "This is the interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days, and within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore your position. You will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand just as you did when you were his cupbearer. But when it goes well for you, please remember me and show me kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh, that he might bring me out of this prison, for I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing for which they should have put me in this dungeon." And when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. There were 3 baskets of white bread in my basket, and in the top basket were all sorts of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." And Joseph replied, "This is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree. And the birds will eat the flesh of your body." Man, that's got to be a shock, right? You just listen to old boy here is like, "Yeah, man, you're going to go back and you're going to serve the Pharaoh and everything's going to be great. Remember me when you get there," right? And then the other guy's like, "All right. So what you got for me? This is my dream." He's like, "Oh, you're going to die. They're going to cut your head off, hang you on a tree, and the birds are going to eat you." Okay. Now, we can also talk about portents here, right? Like, we can talk in the future, archetypes, right? That's what this is an archetype, is whenever the first guy has his, uh, he goes to the one righteous guy, and he gets him to interpret the dreams, and he says that you're going to be redeemed, right? And then the other guy is in the same situation. Lay down. Sorry about the jump cut, but my dog was going nuts. They're picking up the trash out there. Hey, bro, no. Lay down. All right, so the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot all about him. So how does that even happen, right? It has to be divine intervention, because there's 0% chance that you tell this guy this dream, he interprets this dream for you, and then when you get up there, 3 days later, you don't even remember. Seems a little sus. I think it was needed to fit the narrative, and that's cool. Like, again, this is an amalgamation, but this part right here is like, this is so in your face, what, that I can't even. And so we get to the dreams of Pharaoh, and this is 2 full years had passed. Pharaoh has a dream. So the cupbearer forgets about Joseph for 2 whole years. And Pharaoh has a dream, and he was standing beside the Nile when 7 cows, sleek and well fed, came up from the river and began to graze among the reeds. And among them 7 other cows, sickly and thin, came up from the Nile and stood beside the well fed cows on the bank of the river. And the cows that were sickly and thin devoured the 7 sleek, well faced cows. And then Pharaoh woke up, but he fell back asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 heads of grain, plump and ripe, came up on one stalk. After them 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. And the thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 plump, ripe ones. And then Pharaoh awoke and realized it was a dream. And in the morning his spirit was troubled, so he summoned all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, so no one could interpret them for him. Sorry. But then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I recall my failures. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in the custody of the captain of the guard. And one night both the chief baker and I had dreams, and each dream had its own meaning. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us individually. And it happened to us just as he had interpreted. I was restored to my position, and the other man was hanged." Okay, so we've got the dreams, and that's, while prophetic for this time, also prophetic for the future. Like, this is archetype of the Great Tribulation that is in John's Revelation. This is what Daniel foretells of and Isaiah foretells of. Archetyped here in these stories. It's not often recognized. Nobody barely ever expounds upon it, because the prophecy is fulfilled in the time of taking the word at the word. And so, but it's still something to bear in mind that later these prophecies are the same, right? We have 7 years and 7 years, and that's significant. And the 7 years of prosperity prior to the 7 years of persecution's a thing too. Okay, so Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, who was quickly brought out of the dungeon. And after he had shaved and changed his clothes, he went in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, but no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." "I by myself cannot do it," Joseph replied, "but God will give Pharaoh a sound answer." And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when 7 cows, well fed and sleek, came up from the river and began to graze among the reeds. Among them 7 other cows, sickly, ugly, and thin, came up. I've never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. And then the thin, ugly cows devoured the 7 well-fed cows that were there first. And when they had devoured them, however, no one could tell that they had done so. Their appearance was as ugly as it had been before, and then I awoke. And in my dream I also saw 7 heads of grain, plump and ripe, growing on a single stalk, and after them 7 other heads of grain sprouted, withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind. And the thin heads of grain followed the 7 plump ones. Now for them the east wind's coming directly off the desert, right? So that's a hot, dry wind, and scorched by the east wind. And then the thin heads of grain swallowed the 7 plump ones. I told this dream to the magicians, but no one could explain it to me. Now, let's pause here a moment and talk about the magicians, because this absolutely will come up again. This is not pharmakia. It's not. This is not the same. This is the learned ones, the ones that can do magic. That is where the root is coming from on this. And they're knowledgeable in both astronomy and astrology, both, and in alchemy and chemistry, both. And there's a lot of knowledge that we don't acknowledge was knowledge in the times. And there are things that we deny can happen now that we take for granted if we are of faith that happened then, and we just say that it went away. And one of those things we'll see later is that these magicians and wise men could actually perform miracles. They could do the same things that the servants of God could do. That the ones that were actually serving God could do the same things, all up to the last one, right? And so when they cast the staff down, it turns to a snake. The other one turns to a snake too. That's magic. If you are of faith, you believe in magic, right? If you believe in the Bible and that it's real and true, like most people do, then you believe in magic. You just don't believe that it's possible now. And the division of that comes much later, and we will talk about that later. But I wanted to pause right here for that real quick. And I told the dream to the magicians, but no one could explain it to me. And at this, Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 ripe heads of grain are 7 years. The dreams have the same meaning. Moreover, the 7 thin, ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and 7 of the so are the 7 worthless heads of grain, scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. But it is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then, in the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will devastate the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, since the famine that follows it will be so severe. Prepare now. We're telling you, prepare now. Right? Moreover, because the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 versions, the matter has been decreed by God, and he will carry it out shortly. Now, therefore, Pharaoh should look for a discerning and wise man to set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action and appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. Under the authority of Pharaoh, let them collect all the excess food from these good years, so that they may come and lay up the grain to be preserved as food in the cities. This food will be a reserve for the land during the 7 years of famine to come upon the land of Egypt, and then the country will not perish in the famine. And Joseph was given charge of Egypt. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all of his officials, so Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man in whom the Spirit of God abides? He said, all right, I didn't ask all y'all to interpret this, and none of y'all said the right thing. This guy says the right thing. Does anybody have any other person who might be qualified for this? Right? This is not really expecting to have one, right? He's like, anybody else? And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made this all known to you, there is no one as discerning and as wise as you. You shall be in charge of my house, and all my people are to obey your commands. Only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And then Pharaoh also told Joseph, I hereby place you over all the land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh removed the signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger, clothed him in garments of fine linen, and placed a gold chain around his neck. He had Joseph ride in his second chariot, with men calling out before him, "Bow the knee." And so he placed him over all the lands of Egypt. And then Pharaoh declared to Joseph, "I am the Pharaoh, but without your permission no one in all the land of Egypt shall lift his hand or foot." And Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zephanath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priestess of On, to be his wife. And Joseph took charge of all the land of Egypt. Okay, so there's our justification. Right? This is the link that is known, that is brought in so that people know. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of the Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph left Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. And during the 7 years of abundance, the land brought forth bountifully. And during those 7 years, Joseph collected all the excess food in the land of Egypt and stored it in the cities. In every city he laid up the food from the fields around it. And so Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped keeping track of it, for it was beyond measure. And before the years of the famine arrived, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priestess of On. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all of my hardship and all of my father's household." And the second son he named Ephraim, saying, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." When famine, and again, this is bringing in the tithes that need to be there. And when the 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt came to an end, the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. And although there was famine in every country, there was food throughout the land of Egypt. And when extreme hunger came to all the land of Egypt, and people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." And when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. For the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. And every nation came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe all over the earth. All right, so we're not going to get all the way through Genesis. We had some really good points on this. I haven't really got a whole lot to add at this point that I really haven't added going in. We'll get to a summary at the end of this whole section. I'm going to have to wait till tomorrow because I am at the end of my voice. But so far, we have seen a man who has been faithful. He has been faithful in everything he's done. He was faithful before he was sold into slavery. He was faithful as a slave before he was made a prisoner. He was faithful as a prisoner before he was made the ruler in all but the actual rulership. And so he's been rewarded for being faithful through his trials throughout this. This is the one guy. Like, so far, out of everybody descended from Abraham, we've got one guy who shows any example. And this is it. I can see peoples coming from this. I can see nations being blessed from this. The other ones, I don't know about. And I've already made that clear. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up, and we will jump back on this one tomorrow. Hopefully I didn't step on your toes. Like, I'm just reading it. I interject. I put my opinions in there. I know. Like, it's something that I see from the pattern overall. I don't want to take away from the overarching message of the book, because the overarching message of the book is that there was never a sacrifice needed for your redemption. The only thing that was ever needed for your redemption was for you to turn to God, for you to say to him, "Hey, I'm a sinner. I'm sorry," and mean it. And say, "I will change my life for you," and mean it. That's all he's ever wanted the whole time. There was never a sacrifice required, ever. And therefore, everything going forward from the required sacrifice is a problem. I get into a lot of that. I'm not going to get into that in the wrap-up. So, to the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here. And I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. You're perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pittstake. Peace.